What's going on, everybody? Meteorologist Mike Linden back again for a live tropical update here from our studio in Orlando, Florida. I hope you are all doing well. I'm hoping that you are all safe this evening. What a weekend it is. We've got Damien in the back there running the show. If you're watching in the chat, let Damien know you're watching. And of course, if you are not already, be sure to follow us everywhere on social media. We are not only keeping you covered through this tropical season, but we are keeping you covered all the time. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. We are everywhere nowadays. So the handles are right there below. Follow us on those. So, wanted to fill you in on what is going on this evening with a pair of storms right now in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a quite rare event, to say the very least, let alone both of these storms potentially making landfall very close to one another, potentially in a similar place as well. The last time that this has happened, I mean, it was a long time ago here. I've got a tweet here from Philip Klotzbach on Twitter. Big shout out to him. And according to Philip, I got to pull up the tweet here. I missed it. Either way, the last time this has happened, here it is. This, in terms of Laura and Marco, named storms, the 12th and 13th of this season alone, that's wild. If this were to verify, it would be the third time on record, of course, since records began in 1851, with two named storms in the Gulf of Mexico simultaneously. The other two times were in 1933 and in 1959. How about that, right? 2020. I mean, right? That it just have to stop there. Don't have to explain it even more. What a year it has been. So what we're going to do before we start to look at some of the graphics that I've prepared for you this evening so we can start to break things down, let's check out the My Radar app. We can pull that up. Boom, there it is. We're going to take a closer look at these storms. And of course, if you are watching, I've got the chats here next to me. And let me know where you're watching from. We've got Barbara, we've got Jim. Oh, apologies. I'm away from the mic. Thanks, Damien. Barbara, Anna, Jim. What's going on? Ian, how you doing this evening? Got a lot of folks tuning in. We've got Miami, Florida, Illinois. Some folks just want me to get right to it. Well, hey, we will get right to it, folks. Here we go. Let's take a look at the My Radar app. Now, we've got two, again, storms. This guy right here, just to the east of Mexico there, kind of splitting the gap between Cuba and Mexico. That is Tropical Storm Marco. It certainly has started to really get going here. The Gulf of Mexico, incredibly warm in terms of the temperature of the water there. We're talking 85 degrees plus, I mean, up near 88, 89 degrees. And with the way that these storms work, tropical storms and hurricanes, of course, tropical cyclones in general, they really want to be over warm water. That's exactly what they need to really get going. I mean, there are so many factors when it comes to tropical cyclone development that can both help and take away from that development. Wind shear, dry air, so many factors at play, let alone two of them making a run really close to one another. But with the Gulf of Mexico as warm as it is, that certainly could lend to some strengthening, and it seems like that's what the National Hurricane Center is really looking at here as these storms work their way into that incredibly warm area of water. So again, looking at the My Radar app here, we've got the wind layer turned on. You can see Marco. The center of circulation is just to the north of Cancun there. I mean, we are talking splitting the gap between Cuba and Mexico there and about to work its way into the Gulf. We'll take a look at the track in just a second, but let's take a look here at Tropical Storm Laura. Now, this has really been an interesting storm to follow along, considering model runs the past couple of days were putting this thing way north of Puerto Rico and north of Hispaniola. Of course, that's the island that encompasses both the Dominican Republic and Haiti that we're kind of centered on top of right there. Whoop, we zoomed out right here. So it's important to know that right now, as this storm works its way westward across Hispaniola, there are some very tall mountains there. I mean, this is something that we went through just a couple of weeks ago with Isaias, where with that storm making a close call to Hispaniola, those mountains can really start to chop this thing up in the mid layers here of the atmosphere, of course. So this is something to watch that could work to disorganize Laura just a little bit here. But again, the National Hurricane Center, as you'll see in a moment, taking this storm into the Gulf of Mexico, expecting it to strengthen as it does so. So now let's zoom back out a little bit, and I'm going to jump into the layer tab here in the My Radar app, and I'm going to turn on the hurricane tracker. And here you go. You can see the track for both of these storms. And if you look close enough there, you can see that here within the next 24 hours potentially, the National Hurricane Center expecting Marco, that's the storm nearest Mexico right now, expected to become a hurricane into tomorrow morning. So you can see that number 1 there, expected to again become a hurricane into tomorrow morning. In terms of further strengthening, it doesn't seem like that is something that the National Hurricane Center expects to occur just yet, but there you can see, I know it's difficult with both of these tracks being on top of one another. Again, this is not something that happens very often, but there you go, the 24th. And if I do have my dates correct here, that would be Monday for Marco to potentially make a landfall there, really close to Louisiana, in fact, right over Louisiana into the evening hours. Then we've got Laura. It's got a considerable amount of distance to go and a lot of land in between. You can see that, of course, expected to go right on through Hispaniola, through Cuba, and make a close run at the Florida Keys. It seems like the city of Miami and the western coastline of Florida, which just 2 days ago was in the cone from the National Hurricane Center, is no longer. So that is, it just goes to show you that as with life, things can change quickly, very quickly. And here we are looking at 2 storms coming really close to one another, potentially impacting the Gulf Coast, let alone the Gulf Coast, but the same part of the Gulf Coast within a day or 2 of each other. I mean, that is wild. Folks, bear in mind, it is August. We are not even into the peak of hurricane season yet, as we will get to in just a moment. But there you can see that Laura expected to make landfall right there, the 26th. We've got the Marco track to the right, and we've got the Laura track to the left. So just within 2 days of each other, around the same time of evening, of course, which is interesting, that the National Hurricane Center expecting both of these storms to make landfall, weakening rather quickly as they make land. But it seems that if this forecast were to verify, at least right now here on Saturday, that this would be 2 hurricanes making landfall. And it seems like at this point now, landfall, don't want to call it a certainty, but we are certainly looking at the very real possibility of that occurring. You've got plenty of time, at least for Laura, for folks that live along the coastline of Louisiana, Alabama, and even the western panhandle of Florida are in the cones here. There are 2 of them. But you want to get your last minute plans done now, whether that is filling up the car with gas, getting water bottles, getting non-perishable foods into the house, batteries, dog food, all of those supplies. This is something that you more than likely should have already done leading into hurricane season, but you do still have time. And of course, you need to listen to emergency management officials local to your area for any guidance as we continue to go down the road here into next week. So let's jump into the graphics here. We are taking a look at the tropical infrared imagery of both of these storms. You can see that Laura, that's the storm on the right-hand side of your screen there, is a lot larger in size, but is right now kind of, again, working its way through a lot of land. So it's not this, perfect organization. It still has a ways to go, but getting into the Gulf of Mexico is definitely not what you want to see out of these storms, considering, again, how warm it is. I almost liken it to if you have a pot of boiling water, putting it onto a stove range that's already lit, right? I mean, you're not going to lose any of that energy. It's just going to keep things going, if not gain a bit more. And that seems to be the concern with any storms getting into the Gulf of Mexico, historically, that is. But right now, with as warm as the water is, it certainly isn't a good thing when you are talking about these tropical cyclones getting caught in it. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico is very small, especially when you compare it to the Atlantic, the Pacific. But I want to take you now to looking at the tropical climatology for this year. And again, 2020, maybe not the best year for us, but keep in mind, we're right here about. I mean, we're getting to the end of August here into Labor Day weekend. I mean, that's coming here soon. But the peak of hurricane season occurs right here. We're talking mid-September. So we're just kind of getting into it here. I mean, it's like riding a roller coaster. We haven't gone down the hill yet. I mean, we're still climbing, which is unbelievable when you consider we've already seen our 12th and 13th named storms already. I mean, we're working our way through the alphabet big time here. Now, with these storms, the National Hurricane Center has issued watches and warnings, let alone for the Caribbean, but for the United States as well, or at least portions of it. This purple color on the map, that represents a tropical storm warning that's in effect for most of the island of Hispaniola, just a portion of the southern coast there, but all of the northern coast into and around the Bahamas, into the eastern portion of Cuba and Puerto Rico as well, under a tropical storm warning right now, as Tropical Storm Laura sits essentially right on top of it. And again, folks, if you have any questions for me, get them into the comments now. I've got the YouTube stream. I've got the Facebook stream right up next to me here, so I can take a look at that and I can answer some of the questions that you may have before we wrap things up. Now, here is a look at the watches and warnings for the United States. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit for you. That pinkish color, that is a hurricane watch. That's the first that we've seen, at least in these past couple of days here, and that is now official for the southern coastline of Louisiana. You can see that Alabama seems to kind of be the cutoff. This line, let me get the pointer out for you. This line right here is the border separating Louisiana and Alabama, so it's just a teeny little bit of Alabama that is under this hurricane watch, but you almost want to treat the tropical storm watch, this yellow color, the same way as you would treat a hurricane watch. I mean, we're still at the point where there is enough time for these storms to shift a little bit in either direction, that you just want to be prepared for everything. You don't want to be kind of looking at a graphic like this and locking in your plans this early. So much can change, but if you are under any of these watches here, whether it is a hurricane watch or a tropical storm watch, you just need to be sure you have your plan. You have your plan ready to rock at this point. Our meteorologist Stephanie Lauber did a piece we ran during our Hurricane Week kickoff for the season a couple of months ago, or gosh, whenever that was. Time is just flying by this year. But Stephanie talked about having a waterproof tub and having your valuables inside that. You want to have those hurricane kits ready to go now. And again, this is in effect from now through the next couple of days. We already looked at this, but hey, let's look at it one more time here. These are the tracks for both Laura and Marco. What you're looking at here is the track for Tropical Storm Laura, not expected to become a hurricane until early Tuesday morning. You can see Tuesday 2 a.m. there. That is when Laura could strengthen to a Category 1. And of course, look at when that happens. It's right when this storm has cleared all of this land that it still's got to go through. And it remains to be seen whether or not it will even make it once it works its way through all of this land. But again, with as warm as the Gulf of Mexico is, and with the conditions that are in place over the Gulf of Mexico, strengthening could certainly occur if it were to get into the Gulf and have some semblance of of shape, really, at this point. Now, this storm right to the south, that is Marco, and we're going to put the paths right on top of each other. Again, this is not something that happens often. This is wild to see, and of course, it would happen in 2020, right? I'm sure that's what you're seeing all over social media, but I mean, man, Marco and Laura certainly haven't seen Ghostbusters here, because you don't want to cross the streams, right? But here you go. From Sunday into Tuesday, Wednesday, Louisiana could be looking at, or the Gulf Coast, and again, Louisiana could be looking at not only one, but two landfalling Category 1 hurricanes within 2 days of each other. That is so wild to even see. graphically, let alone for that to happen over the next couple of days. So we're talking 75 mile per hour winds there, folks, over a couple of days, let alone the inland flooding that could come from this. So again, if you do live along the Gulf Coast, let alone Louisiana, Alabama, or the far western panhandle of Florida, even Texas, even though that has kind of been taken out of the cone, you still want to be prepared, even at the very minimum, for rough surf these next couple of days. Let's take a look at the spaghetti plots and what these are. If you've never seen these before, if you've heard Stephanie, Leslie, or myself talk about all of these models, right? What essentially those are different computers that are taking all sorts of weather parameters and throwing them into a computer, essentially, and giving you all of these potential outcomes. And these are all of these different models, and these are just a few of them. I mean, we could really crowd the screen here, but we're just going to stick with what we have here so it doesn't become that much of a mess. But this kind of gives us an idea of kind of a lot of the possibilities that, let alone we are looking at, but meteorologists within the National Hurricane Center are looking at as well. I mean, you really would be foolish to only be looking at one particular model and just living by that particular model. I'm sure you've heard the GFS, the European, those are two of the major models in the United States, or at least that meteorologists in the United States use, but there are tons and tons of them. Here's a look at where we could see some of them go, and what you really want to really be paying attention to here is the consensus for both of these storms into Wednesday, and that is Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi as well. So I believe I misspoke. I didn't even say Mississippi earlier. Mississippi also part of this hurricane watch, tropical storm watch that is in effect right there for the Gulf Coast. And again, in terms of a Category 1, that would indeed be a hurricane. But what we are talking about when we talk about a Hurricane 1, or a Category 1 hurricane rather, are sustained winds between 74 and 95 miles per hour, capable of producing minor damage. And if there were to be power outages, those could last for several days, let alone for folks that are right there on the coast, but even inland as well. Keep in mind, emergency crews are likely to be very busy during these events, making sure people are safe. So you want to have that plan in place, as we've talked about many times. If you do, again, live along the coastal area of the United States, let me jump back to this graphic here. We'll take a look, and I'll zoom in for you. That's Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, too. I misspoke earlier and said that was the border between Louisiana and Mississippi. So there we go. Shout out to Mississippi. My apologies there. But that purple color, that is in effect for the southern Louisiana coastline, the southern Mississippi coastline, and just a portion of Alabama there. For folks that live along these areas, you want to be sure, of course, that you are bringing in any of your patio furniture, any children's toys. If you have a trampoline, it's best to disassemble those. I know that you can buy those mounts that you can almost kind of staple them into the ground, really. Those can fail, and boy, when a trampoline catches wind, I mean, it's not even your house that you necessarily have to be worried about 100% of the time. It's your neighbors, too. That's the last thing you want to be dealing with, your trampoline ripping out of your backyard, flying into your neighbor's house. So disassemble that, bring that inside as best you can. And again, be sure that you are prepared for what is potentially to come here over the coming days. Let me take a look here, Damien. I'm going to look at the comments that we're looking at here. Let me just move my computer. Probably a little easier to do that. Move my computer over in front of me here. We'll take a look at some of the comments here on Facebook. If you guys have any questions for me, now would be the time, and I will try to answer them as much as I can. Carol is saying Louisiana and Mississippi in for a rough week. Man, folks in the Gulf Coast are tough, though. I mean, those are some very resilient people. But either way, we are definitely talking about it's just not fun. I mean, dealing with these kinds of events, just not fun. It's 2020, right? I mean, we've already dealt with so much as it is. It's just one more thing, right, to add it to the list. What a year. Maybe a year to forget, right? Matt asking, will this track shift again? And that's a great question, Matt. When we're looking at, and perfect, Damien, that you have the graphic, or that you have the My Radar app up there. in the bottom left-hand corner, if you want to bring it back up for it. There it is. Thanks, Damien. These tracks have shifted, and keep in mind that that center line, that is kind of splitting the difference. You don't even want to be looking almost at that center line. You want to look at the cone entirely. Damien, if you wouldn't mind taking that full here. That cone, Matt, kind of represents any of the possibilities that are in play here. So it's smart on the National Hurricane Center's part, of course, to give themselves that wide range here for those storms to shift. I mean, these are big events, tropical cyclones. So even just a minimal move, whether it be to the west, east, I mean, you could really be looking at some big changes to the track. So whether or not the track will shift dramatically, it still remains to be seen. But I will say that over these past couple of days, I mean, if you've been paying attention to this, Tropical Storm Laura was at one point kind of almost going through the Tampa, Florida area. Now you can see that the National Hurricane Center has shifted that way away from Florida. And really, it's only just a small portion of the Florida Keys that is still in the cone for Laura. So again, you don't want to be looking at that center line and see that and go, that's it, boom, that's the track. You want to be looking at the cone entirely to get the best picture of what we're dealing with here. Matt saying it has shifted dramatically. Yes, absolutely. But those cones are very wide, especially at the back end there. So keep that in mind, that the meteorologists in the National Hurricane Center, they're like the Navy SEALs of tropical forecasting. They are good. They know what they're doing here, giving themselves, again, that wide range. So we will see what happens here over the next couple of days. But again, those hurricane watches are up now for the Gulf Coast, Louisiana mostly, Mississippi, and southern Alabama as well under a tropical storm watch. And again, the far western panhandle of Florida, just a touch of it there, the tropical storm watch. So that is something to keep in mind here these next couple of days. Brent is asking, is there a chance of a Texas landfall? And Brent, that's a great question as well. Again, if you were looking at these tracks over the past couple of days, Texas was in play and could still be in play as well. But it's still, in terms of a landfall, it seems like that has shifted considerably to the east toward the Louisiana area. But Marco could very well work its way west and into Texas and bring heavy rains. So that is something to watch out for into the upcoming work week. We're looking at the Tuesday, Wednesday portion of next week for those rains to potentially work their way toward Texas. But in terms of a landfall, that has shifted way to the east of Texas. Okay, let's see what other questions we've got here. I'm going to jump over to YouTube, and I will pull up that stream if we have any questions coming in on the YouTube stream. There we go. We've got Sandy Rose watching. Big shout out to Sandy. she shouted you out, Damien. Sandy Rose. Love her. She's awesome. Max asking a great question. Was it high pressure that made it shift further into the Gulf of Mexico? So whenever you hear meteorologists talking about a ridge, that is high pressure, and that air rotates clockwise. I think I might be mirrored here in this camera, but again, it rotates clockwise. There is high pressure and a ridge built up over the eastern coastline of the United States right now that is working to kind of steer things a little bit, but it still remains to be seen into these next couple of days how those steering currents could change, let alone the fact that these storms will literally be like right next to each other almost at one point. Sandy asking a good question here. Wouldn't the larger one cancel out the smaller one? That's one kind of thing to dispel. For that to happen, the Gulf of Mexico is very small, and Marco could very well be way ahead of Laura here in the coming days. So, that's something that might be floating around from some kind of questionable meteorological sources. I wouldn't buy into that in the slightest bit there. What else we got here? Sandy says, thank you. Shout out to you, Sandy. Thanks for watching. You're awesome. All right, let me jump back here to Facebook here. Okay, Susan asking the similar question, are the chances of the two storms combining to become one? Very likely for that not to happen. I'm sure you've seen the Fujiwara effect being thrown out there. That's typically something that we see in the Pacific Ocean, where two storms will kind of spin around a center point and then eventually and potentially, it's not a guarantee, combine, but that's likely not to happen here in this situation. Jim asking a great question: how much rain will Marco bring? We're not there just yet, Jim, but it could very likely be quite a bit of rain. Again, for folks that do live along the Gulf Coast, you need to be prepared for some powerful winds, Category 1 hurricane winds, as well as the rain, the potential for storm surge too. I mean, folks in the Gulf Coast have been through this before, and you just need to do your best to prepare as best you can, really. Susan asking, does Louisiana have a bullseye on it? Not necessarily a bullseye, but for two landfalling hurricanes to make landfall within 2 days of each other, really close to where they both make landfall, is incredibly, incredibly rare. But here we are in 2020. I mean, what else do we expect at this point with the way that this year has gone? All right, so I think we've been going on here for long enough. I'll give it just a moment here to get your questions in. Jeremy asking, are they both headed for the same place? So Damien, let me switch this graphic here. We'll jump back to the weather graphics here, and we'll pull up this in full if we can. Just gotta get into the computer. There we go. So these are the two tracks from the National Hurricane Center. The one on the right there, that number one on the right-hand side, that would be Marco, and then the one on the left, that would be Laura. And again, within 2 days of each other. I mean, it's really, really wild to even see this. Within 1 to 2 days, I might add. It's just, oh, man, can't begin to tell you. Only 3 times since record keeping has been going on, folks. Since 1851 has this happened, let alone in August, right? So that is Louisiana, and that is, at least as of now, here Saturday evening, 2 landfalling hurricanes. I mean, really, really close to one another. So folks that live in the Gulf Coast, again, even not in Louisiana, for folks in Mississippi, Alabama, and the far western panhandle of Florida, you all need to have your plan ready to go now before this comes knocking on your door. So I think that we will wrap things up there. Again, if you guys have been watching since the jump, thank you so much. Meteorologist Stephanie Lauber will be back tomorrow. We're working on potentially having a special guest in our live stream, which is really exciting. So look forward to that. And again, Damien, if you want to pull up those social media handles, boom, there they are. Follow us: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. If you didn't have your question answered, get your questions into us there. We try our best to be as active as possible, and we are going to continue to do so right on through the rest of hurricane season and beyond as we work our way toward the end of what has been a challenging year. We'll leave it at that, a challenging year for many, many reasons. And here we go, potentially making weather history here in the next couple of days. So for Damien in the back running the show, I am meteorologist Mike Linden. Stay safe, stay dry, and we'll see you in the next one. Catch you later, everybody.